My father-in-law once told me that Mercer comes from the Napa Valley. He was right about one thing. Hi, welcome to my channel. I have a new story for you today.
My father-in-law once told me that Mercer wine comes from the deepest roots in Napa Valley. He said it at every dinner party, every investor meeting, every harvest celebration. He said it the way some men quote scripture, with reverence, with absolute certainty, and with the quiet expectation that no one in the room would dare to question him. He was right about one thing: roots matter, but he never checked what was buried beneath his. The night my husband slapped me in front of his 600 closest friends, I stopped pretending I didn't know what was in the soil. By Monday, the harvest was over. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before you hear the satisfying part, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand who I was when I lived in that house, what I became, and what I let them turn me into for 8 long years. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. My name is Elise Drummond, not Elise Mercer. I stopped using that name on a Monday morning in October, and I will never use it again. I am 36 years old. I live in Northern California. And for 8 years, my only job was to pour wine and smile. That wasn't always the case, but we'll get to that. Let me tell you about the Mercer estate first. Because if you don't understand the stage, you won't understand the play. The Mercer estate sits on 340 acres of prime Napa Valley land, halfway between Oakville and Rutherford, on a ridge that catches the morning fog and holds it like a secret. 5 vineyards, a stone cellar built in 1922, a main house with 14 rooms, a wraparound porch, and a view that makes you forget you're looking at someone else's kingdom. The property is valued at somewhere north of $90 million, depending on who you ask and how much wine they've had. Theodore Mercer, my father-in-law, built that estate into what it is. Or at least that's the story he tells. He bought the original 60 acres in 1981 when Napa was still farmland and ambition. He expanded. He acquired. He borrowed. He built a brand that ended up in 400 restaurants across the United States, on the shelves of every luxury grocer from Manhattan to Malibu, and in the private cellars of people whose last names you would recognize. The Mercer name meant something. It meant old money. It meant tradition. It meant quality. It also meant something else. But I didn't learn that part until a Sunday morning when I opened a laptop I hadn't touched in 8 years. My husband, Grant Mercer, was the face of the operation. 43 years old, 6'2", square jaw, hair that went silver at the temples in a way that made magazine photographers ask him to turn slightly to the left. He wore linen shirts rolled to the elbow and spoke with the kind of calm authority that made waiters and investors and wives do exactly what he asked without questioning why. Grant was handsome. Grant was confident. Grant was the kind of man that other men wanted to be and other women wanted to be near. Grant was also the kind of man who believed that his hand had a right to any surface it chose, including my face. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. When I moved into the Mercer estate 8 years ago, I thought I was joining a family. I thought I was becoming part of something rooted and real and permanent. I thought the vines that stretched in perfect rows from the main house to the eastern ridge were a metaphor for the life Grant and I would build together. I was wrong about the metaphor. I was wrong about the family. And I was very, very wrong about the roots. Let me tell you what my days looked like. I woke at 6:15 every morning. Not because I had somewhere to be, because Theodore expected breakfast on the porch by 7, and Grant expected me dressed and presentable by the time the vineyard manager arrived at 7:30. I made French press coffee, black, 2 cups, 1 for each Mercer man. I set out fruit, toast, and whatever else the housekeeper, Maria, had prepared the night before. I sat at the table. I smiled. I asked how the grapes were looking. I nodded when Theodore said something about tannin levels or fermentation schedules or barrel allocation. I did not offer my opinion. I did not mention my previous career. I did not correct anyone when the numbers they quoted at the table were wrong. and the numbers were often wrong. I knew this because before I became the woman who poured coffee on a porch in Napa Valley, I was someone else entirely. Someone who read balance sheets the way other people read novels. Someone who could find a $14 million discrepancy in a tax filing before her second cup of coffee. But that woman was gone. Or at least she was supposed to be. Theodore made sure of that. From the very first dinner, he set the rules. Not with a speech. Theodore was too smart for speeches. He set them with silence. With the way he looked at me when I spoke. With the way he turned to Grant and said, one evening in the first month, in front of the entire table, "Does she know anything about wine, or is she just decorative?" Grant laughed. I did not. But I stayed quiet because I loved Grant. Because I thought it would get better. Because I was carrying something inside me that I hadn't told anyone about yet. A child. Our child. And because some part of me, the part that used to close $400 million deals in a glass office in San Francisco, believed that I could outlast them. That patience was a strategy. That silence, in the right hands, is not weakness. It is surveillance. For 8 years, I sat at that table. For 8 years, I poured the coffee and cut the fruit and asked about the grapes. For 8 years, I watched Theodore sign documents and take phone calls and dismiss people with a wave of his hand. For 8 years, I counted. Not the insults, not the dinners where I was ignored, not the parties where Grant introduced me as my wife without ever once adding she used to be a lawyer, or she graduated top of her class, or she could buy and sell every person in this room if her father picked up the phone. No, I counted something else. The evidence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the woman I was before I forgot her name. Before I was the woman who poured coffee on a porch in Napa Valley, I was the woman who closed deals in a glass tower in San Francisco. Morrison and Beck, 42nd floor, financial district, corner office with a view of the Bay Bridge that I earned at 29 and never once took for granted. My name was on the door in brushed silver letters. Elise Drummond, Senior Associate, Mergers and Acquisitions. I was not the smartest person in that building, but I was the most patient. And in M&A, patience is worth more than brilliance. Brilliance finds the opportunity. Patience finds the trap inside the opportunity. And I was very, very good at finding traps. My colleagues called me the closer. Not because I was loud, not because I dominated rooms or pounded tables or raised my voice in negotiations. They called me that because when I sat down at a table with a 500-page acquisition file, I did not leave until every number made sense. Every decimal, every footnote, every buried clause in every subcontract that someone hoped no one would read. I read them all. By the time I was 31, I had closed 11 major deals totaling just over $2 billion in combined value. The biggest was a $400 million energy acquisition. Pacific Northwest. 2 companies. 18 months of negotiation. The deal had stalled 3 times before I was brought in. I found the discrepancy on page 312 of the subsidiary disclosure. A licensing fee that had been reported twice under different entity names. $14 million hidden in plain sight. I flagged it on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the entire deal structure was renegotiated. By the following Monday, it closed. My managing partner, Arthur Morrison, shook my hand that day and said, "Elise, you don't find needles in haystacks. You find the needle, and then you find the second haystack they hid behind the first one." I laughed, but I also never forgot that sentence. Because years later, sitting at a kitchen table in Hugo Franklin's house at midnight on a Sunday, it came back to me like a bell ringing in an empty church. But that's later. Let me tell you how I lost all of that. His name was Grant Mercer, and I met him at a charity wine tasting at the Ferry Building on the Embarcadero. It was a Thursday evening in April. I was 32. I had come straight from the office in a navy suit with my laptop bag still over my shoulder. I was not there to meet anyone. I was there because Arthur Morrison had donated 2 cases of something expensive and someone from the firm needed to show up and smile. I was the someone. Grant was standing near the window, holding a glass of something red that caught the last of the sunset coming off the bay. He was wearing a white linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked like he had never once in his life rushed to get anywhere. He looked like the kind of man who believed the world would wait for him. And it usually did. He introduced himself by his first name only, Grant. No last name, no title, no mention of vineyards or empires, or a father who owned 340 acres of prime Napa real estate. He asked me what I did. I told him. He asked me what I was drinking. I told him I didn't know because someone had handed it to me and I hadn't looked at the label. He laughed, not at me, with me. And that is a distinction I did not realize mattered until much later, when the laughter stopped being with me and started being about me. We talked for 2 hours that night. He asked about my work. He listened. He asked follow-up questions that told me he was actually paying attention, not performing. He told me about the vineyard in Napa, about the fog in the morning and the way the light turns gold at 4 in the afternoon, and how the grapes change color so slowly that you can only see it if you're patient enough to watch. Patient, that was the word he used, and it hooked me. Because patience was the thing I valued most, and here was a man who seemed to understand it, who seemed to live inside it. I did not know then that his patience was a different kind than mine. Mine was a tool. His was a trap. We dated for 6 months. He drove down from Napa every other weekend. I drove up when I could. We had dinners at small restaurants in Yountville. We walked through the vineyards at sunset. He held my hand and told me that I was unlike anyone he had ever met, that I was real, that every other woman in his world cared about labels and appearances, and he was tired of surfaces. He said, "I don't need a show, Elise. I need something real." I believed him. On a Saturday morning in October, 6 months after the wine tasting, Grant asked me to marry him. We were standing in the vineyard behind the main house, between 2 rows of Cabernet vines, and the fog was just beginning to lift. He got on one knee. He held a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. He said, "I want you to put down roots with me." Roots, that word again? I said yes. The first change came 3 weeks after the engagement. Grant said, casually, over dinner in Yountville, that he thought it would be best if I stepped back from Morrison and Beck. Not quit. Step back. He said the vineyard needed a full partner, not a weekend visitor. He said that his father, Theodore, believed that a Mercer wife should be present, should be visible, should be part of the brand. I said I would think about it. Grant said, "There's nothing to think about, Elise. I don't need a lawyer. I need a partner." I heard the word partner, and I thought he meant equal. He meant available. My mother had died 4 years earlier. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was a high school English teacher in Petaluma, who had never once in her life raised her voice at a student, a stranger, or her daughter. She believed in books and kindness and the stubborn, quiet power of showing up every single day whether anyone noticed or not. Before she died, she gave me 2 things. The first was a sentence. She said, "Never give up the thing that makes you, you." The second was her watch, a Cartier tank, gold, small, simple. She had saved for it for 3 years. She wore it every day from the day she bought it to the day she couldn't lift her wrist anymore. I wore it the day I resigned from Morrison and Beck. Arthur Morrison walked me to the elevator. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just said, "The door stays open, Elise. Always." I thanked him. I rode the elevator down 42 floors. I walked out onto Market Street with a cardboard box and a watch that felt heavier than everything inside it. I thought I was choosing love. I was choosing disappearance. The wedding was in June at the Mercer estate. 200 guests, white linen, string quartet. Theodore gave a toast in which he mentioned Grant's name 14 times and mine once. At the end, he looked at me and said, "Welcome to the family, Elizabeth." My name is Elise. I did not correct him. I should have. That was the first night I slept in the main house as a Mercer wife. Grant carried me across the threshold. I remember thinking, as he set me down on the hardwood floor of the hallway, that the house smelled like oak and tannin and something older, something buried. I told myself it was history. It was not history. It was rot. I traded a corner office for a vineyard. I thought it was love. He thought it was compliance. Theodore Mercer was not a loud man. That was the first thing people got wrong about him. They expected a patriarch to shout, to slam his fist on the table, to fill every room with the kind of heavy, sweating authority that announces itself before it sits down. Theodore did none of those things. He spoke quietly. He moved slowly. He wore the same style every day. Linen suit, light gray or light blue, leather shoes that were handmade in Florence and resoled every 18 months by the same cobbler on First Street in Napa. His hair was white and combed straight back, close to his skull, and he smelled like cedarwood and old paper and the particular kind of confidence that comes from never once in 74 years being told no by someone who mattered. Theodore controlled his empire the way a clock controls a room, not by being loud, by being constant, by never stopping, by making every other moving part adjust to his rhythm. He checked the vineyard books every morning at 7:15. He called his banker at 9. He walked the eastern ridge at 10:30, alone, with a cane he did not need but carried anyway because it made him look like the kind of man who had walked this land since before anyone else was born. He returned by 11. He took lunch on the porch. He reviewed correspondence in the afternoon. He made decisions at 4. And by the time the sun dropped behind the Mayacamas Mountains and the valley turned that deep amber color that tourists pay thousands of dollars to photograph, Theodore Mercer had already decided what tomorrow would look like for every person within a 5-mile radius of his property, including me. The rules for me were never spoken. That was the genius of it. Theodore understood that a spoken rule can be challenged. A written rule can be contested. But a rule that is simply understood, a rule that exists in the silence between sentences, in the angle of a glance, in the slight pause before someone changes the subject, that kind of rule cannot be broken because it was never officially made. Rule 1. I did not speak at the dinner table unless asked a direct question. Rule 2. I did not discuss my previous career, ever. When guests visited the estate, which happened often, I was introduced as Grant's wife. Not as a lawyer, not as a professional, not as a person who had once stood in a boardroom on the 42nd floor of a building in the financial district and restructured a $400 million deal while 7 men twice her age sat across the table and tried to find a flaw in her numbers and failed. Just Grant's wife. Rule 3. I did not challenge Theodore's numbers. This was the rule that cost him the most in the end. Because I did not challenge them, I memorized them. The first family dinner set the tone for all the others. It was a Sunday, 2 weeks after the wedding. Theodore sat at the head of the table. Grant sat to his right. I sat to Grant's right, which placed me as far from Theodore as the geometry of a rectangular table would allow without actually being in another room. Maria had prepared roast chicken with rosemary from the garden, potatoes from a farm in Sonoma that Theodore claimed to have a personal relationship with, and a bottle of the 2014 Reserve Cabernet that Theodore described without irony as the finest expression of Mercer soil in a generation. The soil. He talked about the soil the way other men talk about God, with awe, with ownership, as if the dirt beneath his vines had chosen him personally and rejected everyone else. I made the mistake of speaking. Grant had mentioned, casually, that the estate's annual revenue had crossed $180 million for the first time. Theodore nodded. I said, without thinking, "Is that net or gross?" The table went quiet. Theodore looked at me. Not with anger, with something worse. Curiosity. The kind of curiosity a man has when a piece of furniture makes an unexpected sound. "Gross," he said. Then he turned to Grant and added, in the same conversational tone one might use to comment on the weather, "Does she know anything about wine, or is she just decorative?" Grant laughed. I felt the laugh land in the center of my chest. Not like a punch, like a nail. Small, precise, driven in with a single tap and left there. I did not laugh. I did not speak again that evening. I cut my chicken into small pieces, and I ate every one of them, and I drank my wine slowly, and I waited until Theodore and Grant had moved to the study before I stood up from the table. Maria was clearing the dishes. She looked at me with an expression that I would not fully understand until years later. It was not pity, it was recognition. She had seen this before. She had watched other women sit at that table and shrink. I decided in that moment that I would not shrink. But I also would not fight. Not yet, not there, not with those tools. I would wait, and I would watch. Over the next 8 years, I learned Theodore's patterns the way a seismologist learns a fault line. I knew when the tremors were coming before anyone else felt them. I knew which phone calls made him stand up from his chair. I knew which bank statements made him close his office door. I knew that every January, he spent 3 days locked in the study with an accountant named Gerald Whitfield, and that after Gerald left, Theodore always poured himself 2 glasses of whiskey instead of 1. 2 glasses meant something had been adjusted, something had been moved, something had been hidden. I did not know what, not yet, but I knew the pattern. And patterns, in my experience, are confessions waiting to happen. Grant changed during those years. Or maybe Grant did not change. Maybe Grant simply stopped pretending. The man who had held my hand in the vineyard and talked about patience and sunlight and roots became the man who checked his phone during dinner and answered his father's questions before I could open my mouth and introduce me to business partners with a hand on my lower back that was less affection and more steering. He steered me away from conversations about numbers. He steered me away from his office. He steered me toward the kitchen, the garden, the guest list, the decorations. The soft perimeter of the Mercer empire where I could be visible but not consequential. And I let him. I let him because of the boy sleeping upstairs. I let him because every night when I closed the door of Liam's room and stood in the hallway alone, I could hear my mother's voice. Never give up the thing that makes you, you. I hadn't given it up, Mama. I had just put it in a drawer. And drawers, when you open them at the right moment, can change everything. Theodore liked to say the Mercer soil was sacred. Sacred things, I learned, are often the most contaminated. For 8 years, I sat at that table. For 8 years, I counted. Not the insults, the evidence. I was born on a Tuesday in March at 3:47 in the afternoon at Queen of the Valley Medical Center in Napa. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, brown curly hair that came from my side. Eyes that were mine. Hands that were small enough to wrap around my index finger and strong enough to make me forget every room I had ever walked out of and every deal I had ever closed and every version of myself I had ever been. He made a sound when they placed him on my chest. Not a cry. A breath. A long, slow breath. Like he had been holding it for 9 months and had finally decided the world was safe enough to exhale. Grant was in the room. He held my hand during the delivery. He cut the cord. He took photographs. He did the things that husbands do in delivery rooms when other people are watching. And then, 45 minutes later, he stepped into the hallway to call Theodore. I heard him through the door. It's a boy, Dad. 7 pounds 4. Healthy. Looks like a Mercer. He looks like me, I thought. But I did not say it, because I was holding my son for the first time, and there are moments in life where correcting someone is less important than breathing. Theodore arrived 3 hours later. He brought a bottle of the 2011 Reserve. He poured a glass for Grant. He poured a glass for the attending nurse, who politely declined. He did not pour a glass for me. He looked at Liam for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "Good, a boy. The vineyard needs a boy." Not congratulations, not he's beautiful, not how are you, Elise. The vineyard needs a boy. That was the moment I understood what my son would be to them. Not a child. Not a person, a label, a logo, a future spokesman in a linen suit standing in front of 340 acres of someone else's legacy, smiling for cameras he didn't ask for. I held Liam tighter. For the first 2 years, I was invisible in a way that worked in my favor. Theodore had no interest in diapers or midnight feedings or the particular chaos of a household with a newborn. Grant had even less. He visited the nursery the way one visits a satellite office, briefly, with a sense of obligation rather than purpose. He kissed Liam's forehead at night the way he signed documents, quickly, without reading them. So it was me and Liam, just us. In the mornings before the house woke up. In the afternoons when Grant was in the office and Theodore was on the phone. In the evenings when the fog rolled in and the vineyard went quiet and the only sound was my son's breathing and the distant hum of the cooling system in the cellar below. I read to him every night. Not children's books. I mean, yes, children's books too. But also anything I was reading. I read him chapters from novels, paragraphs from legal journals I still subscribed to, recipes from the cookbook Maria left on the kitchen counter. I read him the labels on wine bottles, not because I cared about the wine, but because the rhythm of language mattered more than the content. And I wanted him to hear his mother's voice saying words that had weight. I wanted him to know that I had a voice, even if no one else in that house seemed to remember. Liam grew the way children grow when they are loved completely by at least one person, quickly, curiously, with an appetite for questions that would have made my mother proud. He started walking at 11 months. He started talking at 14 months. His first word was mama, and I will carry that sound in my chest until the day I stop breathing. By the time he was 3, he had a habit that I did not teach him, but that I recognized immediately because it was mine. He watched. He sat in a room full of adults, and he watched their faces and their hands and the way they moved when they thought no one was paying attention. He was not shy. He was studying. My son was an observer. And observers, I knew from professional experience, are the most dangerous people in any room. When Liam was 4, he started walking with me through the vineyard in the late afternoon. It became our ritual. Every day at 4:30, after his nap, we walked the path between the main house and the eastern ridge. He held my hand. He asked questions. Mommy, why are the grapes purple? Because the sun and the soil work together to make them that color. Mommy, why does Grandpa yell? I paused. Theodore did not yell, exactly. He projected, he issued, he stated. But to a 4-year-old, the difference between authority and anger is non-existent. Some people forget how to be quiet, baby. Is he mad at us? No, sweetheart, he's just loud. Mommy, why doesn't Daddy hold your hand anymore? I did not answer that one. I squeezed Liam's hand instead and pointed at a hawk circling above the ridge and said, Look, baby, look how patient he is. He's just waiting for the right moment. Liam looked up. The hawk turned once, twice, 3 times, and then dropped out of the sky like a stone and came up with something in its talons. He got it, Mommy. He did. Because he waited? Because he waited. Liam smiled. I smiled. And somewhere inside me, the woman on the 42nd floor opened a drawer and checked that everything was still there. It was. When Liam was 5, the questions got harder. Mommy, why do you always sit at the end of the table? Because that's my seat, baby. But you were here before me and I sit closer to Grandpa. You're special. You're special too, Mommy. I had to leave the room after that one. I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and pressed my back against the wall and breathed. Not because I was sad, because my 5-year-old son had said to me in 6 words what no other person in that house had said in 8 years. You're special too. During those years, I began to prepare. Not for revenge. I did not think in those terms, not yet. I prepared for possibility. I photocopied documents that Theodore left on the study desk when he went for his 10:30 walk. I photographed bank statements that Grant left open on his laptop when he stepped out for calls. I kept a notebook, small, leather-bound, hidden inside a box of Liam's old baby clothes in the closet. I did not know what I was building. I told myself it was insurance, in case things got worse, in case I needed to leave, in case the day came when staying quiet was no longer a strategy but a surrender. But I was also doing something else, something I didn't fully admit to myself until much later. I was counting, the same way I had counted in that glass tower in San Francisco. Line by line, page by page, number by number. The woman in the drawer was not sleeping. She was filing. I stayed because roots need time to grow, and my son was the only root that mattered. I would have stayed forever for him, but on a Saturday night in October, my husband made sure I didn't have to. The invitation said, "An evening of legacy," gold embossed lettering on cream cardstock, heavy enough to feel important in your hand. Theodore had designed it himself. Or rather, Theodore had described what he wanted and someone else had made it, which is how most things at the Mercer estate worked. Saturday, October 12th, 6 o'clock in the evening. The Grand Cellar, 600 guests. Black tie optional, which in Napa Valley means black tie mandatory, but phrased in a way that allows billionaires to feel casual about their wealth. The occasion was our 8th wedding anniversary, mine and Grant's. But the word anniversary appeared exactly once on the invitation, in a font 2 sizes smaller than the words Mercer Estate and Grand Cellar, and Theodore Mercer cordially invites you. Our marriage was not the event. Our marriage was the excuse for the event. The real purpose, as it always was Theodore. Theodore's wine. Theodore's name. Theodore's 340 acres of what he believed to be the most important dirt in the Western Hemisphere. I learned about the party 4 weeks before it happened. Not from Grant, not from Theodore, from the event coordinator, a woman named Bethany who called the house on a Tuesday afternoon and asked me to confirm the linen color for the gala. What gala? I said. The anniversary gala, Mrs. Mercer. 600 confirmed. Mr. Mercer Sr. has approved the final guest list. 600 people were coming to celebrate my marriage, and no one had told me. I mention this not because it surprised me. By year 8, very little surprised me. I mention it because I want you to understand the architecture of that house. Decisions were made above me. Information traveled around me. I existed in the structure the way a window exists in a wall. Present, transparent, designed to let light in without being the source of it. The guest list, when I finally saw it, read like a directory of Northern California power. Wine industry executives from every major label in the valley. Restaurant owners from San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York. 2 state senators, a retired federal judge, a food critic from the New York Times who had given Mercer wines a 97-point rating in 2019 and had been treated like royalty ever since. Investors from Hong Kong, London, and Sao Paulo. And scattered among them, the local fixtures, the mayor of Napa, the sheriff, the county assessor, the people who signed the permits and approved the zoning and looked the other way when Theodore's property lines shifted 3 inches to the left every few years. I see 600 people, and not one of them knew what was buried in the soil they would be standing on. The week before the party, the estate transformed. Trucks arrived daily, lighting rigs, sound equipment, a string quartet from the San Francisco Conservatory, $12,000 worth of flowers, white roses, and eucalyptus, and something called legianthus that I had never heard of, and that Theodore pronounced incorrectly every time he said it, but no one corrected him because no one ever corrected Theodore about anything. The grand cellar was the centerpiece. Built in 1922 from Napa fieldstone, it sat beneath the main house like a cathedral buried underground. Arched ceilings, stone walls 3 feet thick, oak barrels stacked floor to ceiling along both sides, each one branded with the Mercer crest. The room held 400 comfortably. Theodore was putting 600 in it because Theodore did not believe in comfort. He believed in impression. On Friday evening, the night before the gala, Theodore called a family meeting in the study. Just the 3 of us, Grant, Theodore, and the decorative one. Theodore had a new idea. He wanted Liam to speak, not a toast, not a few cute words from a 5-year-old that the audience would find charming and forget. A scripted presentation. 3 minutes long. Liam would stand on the stage in the grand cellar in front of 600 guests and recite a passage about Mercer wine, about family, about legacy. Theodore had already written the script. He handed it to Grant on a single typed page. I read it over Grant's shoulder. My name is Liam Mercer. I am 5 years old, and I am the future of Mercer wine. My grandfather built this vineyard with his own hands. My father grew it into an empire, and one day I will carry the Mercer name into the next generation. Because Mercer wine comes from the deepest roots, and our roots are forever. My 5-year-old son, reading a commercial, in front of 600 strangers, written by a man who had spent exactly 11 seconds looking at him the day he was born. I said no, quietly, calmly, the way I had learned to say things in that house, without raising my voice, without challenging the architecture. Just a simple, clear, quiet no. He's 5, Theodore. He doesn't need to be on a stage. Theodore looked at me, then he looked at Grant. He did not look at me again. Grant, he said, handle this. Grant turned to me. I expected negotiation. I expected the soft, careful maneuvering that Grant used when he wanted me to do something I didn't want to do. The gentle pressure, the reasonable tone, the quiet implication that I was being difficult. Instead, he said, My father knows what he's doing, Elise. Liam will speak. He's a child, Grant, not a brand ambassador. He's a Mercer. He's my son. Grant paused. Something moved behind his eyes. Not doubt, calculation. The same look his father got when someone questioned a number at the dinner table. He's speaking, Grant said. That's final. I did not argue further, not because I agreed, because I recognized the ceiling. There was nowhere to go in that room. The decision had been made above me, the way all decisions were made above me, and the only thing left to do was wait. I went upstairs. Liam was already asleep. I stood in his doorway and watched him breathe. Curly hair on the pillow, one arm around a stuffed rabbit named Henry that he had carried everywhere since he was 2. He looked so small. He looked like the only clean thing in a house full of dirt. I whispered, I won't let them use you, baby. I promise. I did not know yet how I would keep that promise, but I knew that I would. Hugo was standing at the edge of the vineyard when I stepped outside. I could see him from the back porch, 61 years old, white beard, denim jacket, boots that had more soil on them than Theodore's entire philosophy. He was looking at the party tent that the crew had assembled near the cellar entrance. He shook his head slowly, then he looked up and saw me on the porch. He didn't wave, he didn't speak. He just nodded, once. The way someone nods when they already know. I nodded back. At 8:45 the next evening, the guests began to arrive. At 9:14, the evening ended. The grand cellar was full by 8:50. 600 people arranged in a space designed for 400, standing between oak barrels and stone walls, and $12,000 worth of white roses that were already beginning to wilt in the heat of too many bodies pressed too close together. The string quartet played Vivaldi. Waiters in black vests moved through the crowd carrying trays of the 2019 Mercer Reserve Cabernet, poured into crystal glasses that Theodore had ordered from a glassmaker in Austria. $42 per glass. 600 guests. Theodore had calculated the cost of the evening down to the last ice cube and considered every dollar an investment in the only thing he truly valued, his name. I stood near the back beside a barrel marked Reserve Lot 17, wearing an emerald dress that Theodore had selected. Not suggested, selected. He had sent it to the house 3 days earlier in a garment bag with a note that said, "This is appropriate." No greeting, no signature, just the dress and the instruction. The dress was beautiful. I will not pretend otherwise. Floor-length silk, high neckline, long sleeves. The kind of dress that photographs well and says nothing about the woman wearing it. Which was, of course, the point. I wore my mother's Cartier watch beneath the left sleeve, the only thing on my body that belonged to me. Grant was at the center of the room, doing what Grant did best. Smiling, shaking hands, touching shoulders, saying the names of important people with the kind of warm familiarity that made each one believe they were his closest friend. He was good at this. I had watched him do it for 8 years, and I still could not tell where the performance ended and the person began. Perhaps there was no difference. Perhaps Grant Mercer was the performance. Theodore stood near the stage, a raised platform at the far end of the cellar, backed by a stone archway and flanked by 2 oversized photographs of the vineyard at harvest. He was holding a wireless microphone in his right hand and his cane in his left. He was not using the cane for balance. He was holding it the way a conductor holds a baton. Ready. Liam was upstairs with Maria. I had asked her to keep him there until I came to get him. She had agreed. But I saw Theodore glance at his watch at 8:55. Then again at 9. He was counting down to something. At 9:02, Theodore stepped onto the stage. The quartet stopped. The room went quiet. Not because Theodore asked for silence, because Theodore walked into the light and the light did the rest. 600 faces turned toward him like sunflowers. "Good evening," he said. "Thank you for being here. Tonight we celebrate something rare. Not just a marriage, but a legacy. The Mercer legacy." He spoke for 8 minutes. About the vineyard, about the soil, about 3 generations of Mercer hands in Napa dirt. He mentioned Grant 4 times. He mentioned me 0 times. He mentioned Liam once, at the very end. "And now," Theodore said, "I'd like to invite the youngest Mercer to the stage. My grandson, the future of this vineyard, Liam." The room applauded. 600 pairs of hands. The sound bounced off the stone walls and filled the cellar like a wave. I looked at the stairs. Maria was walking down with Liam. He was wearing a small navy blazer that I had not seen before. Theodore had dressed him. Theodore had prepared this. While I was standing in the back of the room beside Reserve Lot 17, Theodore had sent someone upstairs to bring my son down in a costume I did not choose for a performance I had explicitly refused. Liam reached the bottom of the stairs. His eyes found mine immediately. The way children find their mothers in any room, in any crowd, at any distance. He looked at me. His lips were pressed together. His hand was holding a folded piece of paper, the script. He was scared. I moved. I did not run. I did not push through the crowd. I walked, quickly, directly, through the 600 guests who parted slightly as I passed, not because they understood what was happening, but because something in the way I moved told them to step aside. I reached Liam at the base of the stage. I knelt. I took his hand. The paper crumpled between our fingers. "You don't have to do this, baby," I whispered. "Mommy's here." Theodore's voice came through the microphone. "Elise, let him come up." I stood. I turned to face the stage. 600 people watched. "He's 5 years old, Theodore. He is not a commercial." The room shifted. Not a gasp. Something quieter. A collective intake of breath. The sound of 600 people realizing simultaneously that the window had just spoken. Theodore said nothing. He looked at Grant. Grant was already walking toward me. He moved through the crowd the way he always moved, smoothly, smiling, as if nothing unusual were happening. As if this were simply another small adjustment, another steering. He reached me. He stood close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath. 3 glasses, maybe 4. His eyes were not angry. They were embarrassed. And embarrassment, in a man like Grant, was far more dangerous than anger. Because anger passes. Embarrassment lingers. Embarrassment demands payment. He leaned in. His mouth was near my ear. His voice was low enough that only I could hear it. "Don't embarrass me, Elise." I looked at him. I looked at my son. I looked at 600 people who were watching a marriage dissolve in real time and did not yet know it. "He's a child, Grant." Grant pulled back. His jaw tightened. His right hand came up. I saw it before it arrived. Not because it was slow. Because I had been watching hands my entire life. In boardrooms, in negotiations, in every room I had ever entered where the power was not mine. You learn to read hands when you are the person who is not holding the pen. His palm was open. His fingers were together. The strike came from the right side, slightly upward, and it connected with my left cheek at 9:14 p.m. on Saturday, October the 12th. The sound was sharp, flat, like a book dropped on a stone floor. It echoed off the cellar walls, then silence. 4 seconds. 1. The sting spread from my cheekbone to my ear. I felt the heat before the pain. 2. Liam made a sound. Not a cry, a gasp. The kind of sound a child makes when the world does something it promised it wouldn't. 3. 600 people stood frozen, glasses in hands, mouths open. No one moved. No one spoke. No one intervened. Because this was the Mercer estate, and in the Mercer estate, things happened above you, and you did not interfere. 4. Theodore cleared his throat into the microphone. He said, "She's emotional. Please, enjoy the wine." 4 seconds. That is how long it takes for a room of 600 people to decide whether they are witnesses or guests. They chose guests. They always choose guests. I did not touch my cheek. I did not cry. I did not look at Grant. I did not look at Theodore. I looked down at Liam. He was holding my hand with both of his. His eyes were wide and wet and locked on mine with the kind of desperate trust that only a child can give. The trust that says, "You are the only safe thing in this room, and I need you to prove it right now." I bent down. I picked him up. He was 41 pounds. I knew this because I had weighed him at the pediatrician 6 days earlier. 41 pounds of curly hair and shaking hands, and a crumpled script that fell to the stone floor as I lifted him. I turned. I walked through the 600 guests. They parted again, wider this time. No one touched me. No one spoke to me. No one offered help or comfort, or even the small mercy of eye contact. I walked up the cellar stairs, through the hallway, through the kitchen, past Maria, who was standing by the counter with both hands over her mouth, out the back door, into the night. The air hit my face and I tasted October. Cold, clean. The kind of air that only exists in wine country after the sun goes down and the earth begins to release the heat it has been holding all day. Liam pressed his face into my neck. His tears were warm on my skin. "Mommy," he said. "I know, baby. Your face is red." "I know. Are we going home?" I looked back at the main house. Every light was on. Inside, 600 people were returning to their wine. Inside, Theodore was probably already rewriting the narrative. Inside, Grant was probably standing exactly where I left him, embarrassed not by what he had done, but by the fact that I had walked away before he could tell me to. "No, baby," I said, "we're not going home." I held him tighter and walked into the vineyard. The rows of vines stretched out in front of us in the dark, perfectly straight, perfectly ordered, like everything the Mercers built. And somewhere at the end of those rows, past the eastern ridge, past the irrigation shed, past the property line, there was a small house with a porch light on. Hugo's house. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I picked up my son and I walked out. Not because I was weak, because I had already decided what Monday would look like. The walk from the back door of the Mercer estate to Hugo Franklin's house was 12 minutes. I know this because I had walked it before. Not often, not regularly, but enough times over 8 years that my feet knew the path even in the dark. The vineyard at night is a different place than the vineyard in daylight. During the day, the rows are neat and beautiful and photogenic. They look like order. They look like intention. But at night, when the fog rolls in from the Mayacamas and the only light is whatever the sky decides to offer, the rows become corridors, narrow, enclosed, and the vines, which look so elegant at noon, become shapes that reach for you from both sides. Liam's arms were around my neck. His face was still pressed against my skin. He had stopped crying by the 3rd minute, but his breathing was uneven. Short inhales, long exhales. The breathing pattern of a child whose body is trying to decide whether it is safe enough to sleep. "Mommy, where are we going?" "To see a friend, baby." "Which friend?" "Hugo." "The great man?" "Yes, the great man." Liam had his own name for Hugo. The great man. Because every time Liam saw Hugo in the vineyard, Hugo would kneel down and show him something. A cluster that was almost ready. A leaf that had changed color overnight. A beetle that lived in the soil and helped the roots breathe. Hugo never talked down to Liam. He talked to him the way he talked to the vines. With patience. With specificity. With the quiet assumption that whatever he was speaking to deserved his full attention. Hugo's house sat 200 yards past the eastern property line of the Mercer estate, on a half-acre plot that Theodore had sold to him 23 years ago for a price that was, by all accounts, fair. It was a small house, single-story, wood siding painted white, though the paint had begun to peel on the south-facing wall. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a gas stove that Hugo had repaired himself 4 times, a porch with a single wooden rocking chair and a light. The porch light was on. It was always on. Hugo left it on every night from sundown to sunrise because he had once told me that a lit porch means someone is welcome. He said his wife, Dorothy, who had died 11 years ago, had started the tradition when they first moved in. She said that a dark porch is a closed door, and a closed door is a decision you make before you know who's knocking. Dorothy was right. I reached the porch at 9:52 p.m. I did not knock. The door opened before my hand reached it. Hugo stood in the doorway, white beard, denim jacket, the same one he had been wearing earlier when he stood at the edge of the vineyard and shook his head at the party tent. His eyes went to my face first, then to Liam, then back to my face. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask why I was there. He did not ask if I was okay, because the answer was visible and asking would have been a waste of both our time. He stepped aside and said 2 words. "Come in." The inside of Hugo's house smelled like wood smoke and black tea, and the faint, permanent scent of soil that lives in the clothes of a man who has worked the earth for 40 years. The furniture was old and mismatched. A brown corduroy sofa with a blanket folded over one arm. A kitchen table with 3 chairs, one of which had a leg that Hugo had shimmied with a piece of cardboard from a wine box. A bookshelf filled not with books, but with seed catalogs, almanacs, and 3 framed photographs. Dorothy on their wedding day, Dorothy in the vineyard, Dorothy on this porch, with the light behind her. Hugo took Liam from my arms, gently, without asking. The way someone takes a child when they understand that the person holding the child has been holding more than the child. He carried Liam to the sofa. He laid him down. He covered him with the blanket. Liam's eyes were already closing. His hand found the edge of the blanket and held it the way he held Henry the stuffed rabbit. And within 2 minutes, he was asleep. Hugo walked to the stove. He lit the burner. He filled a kettle. He did not speak until the water began to heat. "How long?" he said. He was not asking how long since the slap. He was asking how long since things had been this way. 8 years, I said. Hugo nodded. He poured 2 cups of black tea. No sugar, no milk. He set one in front of me and sat down across the table. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at me with an expression I had only seen once before in my life. On Maria's face, the night of the first family dinner, recognition. "I've been at that vineyard for 23 years, Hugo said. "I was there before Grant came back from business school. Before Theodore expanded to 5 vineyards. Before any of the investors or the politicians or the fancy critics. I was there when it was 60 acres and a dream. And an old man who worked harder than anyone I've ever known." He paused. Theodore was different then. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was always this. Maybe success just gave him permission. Hugo set down his cup. "There were 3 families, Elise. 3 families who had land bordering the estate. Good land, deep soil, roots going back generations." He said their names. The Petersons, 80 acres. 4th-generation farmers, pears and walnuts. The Huangs, 45 acres, 3rd generation. Table grapes and persimmons. The Delgados, 60 acres, 3 generations. Mixed vegetables and a small apricot orchard that Mrs. Delgado's grandmother had planted in 1941. 185 acres combined. 3 families. Exposed roots that Theodore wanted removed. He took them, Hugo said, not with a gun, not with a threat, with paper, tax liens, shell companies, lawsuits they couldn't afford to fight. He bought their debts through a company called Napa Heritage Group. Nobody knew it was him. By the time they figured it out, their land was already transferred. Theodore filed the deeds on a Friday afternoon in August when the county assessor was on vacation. I remembered the county assessor. He had been on the guest list for tonight's gala. Table 7, near the stage. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. Hugo looked at his tea. "Because I was afraid. Because I needed the job. Because Dorothy was sick and the insurance was through the estate, and I told myself that silence was survival." He looked up. "But silence isn't survival, Elise. Silence is just slow rot, and I've been rotting for 23 years. He stood. He walked to the bedroom and came back with a cardboard box. Inside it were papers, dozens of them. Purchase agreements, tax filings, correspondence between Theodore and Gerald Whitfield, the accountant who visited every January. Invoices from chemical companies for pesticides that should never have been used on land certified as organic. Photographs of labels that didn't match contents. Maps showing original property lines and the new ones that had replaced them. "I kept everything," Hugo said. "Dorothy told me to. She said, 'One day someone will need this, and it won't be us.'" Dorothy. The woman who kept the porch light on because a dark porch is a closed door. I looked at the box. I looked at Hugo. I looked at my son sleeping on the sofa with a borrowed blanket and no idea that the world had shifted beneath him tonight. I pulled my chair closer to the table. I opened my laptop for the first time in 8 years. The screen lit up. The login page appeared. My fingers found the keyboard. The time was 11:47 p.m. Hugo sat back down across from me. He pushed the box to my side of the table. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I looked at the screen. I looked at the box. I felt the Cartier watch against my wrist, still ticking, the way it had been ticking since the day my mother strapped it on and never took it off. "What I was trained to do," I said. "Find the second haystack." I opened my laptop at 11:47 p.m. By midnight, I was no longer a wife at a vineyard. I was an M&A lawyer with a target. I did not sleep that night. Liam slept on Hugo's sofa. Hugo slept in his chair, chin on his chest, hands easy. still wrapped around an empty teacup. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the porch settling in the cold. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and Hugo's cardboard box, and 8 years of silence ready to be converted into numbers. Numbers do not lie. People lie, systems lie, smiles lie. The voice of a man who says she's emotional into a microphone in front of 600 people while his daughter-in-law's cheek is still burning. That lies. But numbers, when you know how to read them, tell you everything that the people behind them were trying to hide. I started with the public records. Napa County Assessor's Office, online portal, property transfers, tax filings, business entity registrations. I cross-referenced everything Hugo had given me with everything the state of California made available to anyone patient enough to look. And I was patient. By 1:30 in the morning, I had confirmed the first layer. Napa Heritage Group, LLC, registered in Delaware on March 15, 2009. Single member, no public-facing name. But the registered agent was a firm called Whitfield and Associates, Gerald Whitfield, the same accountant who visited Theodore every January, the same man who left the study smelling like whiskey and guilt while Theodore poured himself that second glass. Napa Heritage Group had acquired the debts of 3 families between 2010 and 2014. The Petersons' property tax lien, purchased for $62,000. The Huang's outstanding mortgage, transferred from a local credit union that should never have sold it. The Delgado's equipment loan, bundled with a second trust deed that Mrs. Delgado had signed without legal representation. Once Napa Heritage Group held the debts, it called them. All 3, simultaneously. In August 2014, the same month the county assessor was on vacation, 3 families received foreclosure notices on the same Friday. By October, their land belonged to Napa Heritage Group. By December, Napa Heritage Group had transferred all 185 acres to the Mercer estate. Theodore's signature was on the final deed. He had not even bothered to hide it at the end. Because by the end, there was no one left to check, except me. 8 years too late and 12 minutes down the road in a house with a porch light on. I kept digging. By 3:15 in the morning, I found the second layer. The organic certifications. Hugo's box contained invoices from Clearfield Chemical Supply, a distributor based in Stockton. 14 invoices over 6 years, totaling just over $430,000. The products listed included chlorpyrifos, methyl bromide, and glyphosate. 3 chemicals that are explicitly prohibited under USDA organic certification standards. 4 of the 5 Mercer vineyards were certified organic. That certification was the foundation of the Mercer brand. It was on every bottle, every advertisement, every press release, every review that called Mercer wine pure and authentic and rooted in the land. The certification was a lie. Hugo had known this for years. He had seen the trucks arrive at night. He had seen the workers in masks spraying rows that were supposed to be untouched. He had photographs, time-stamped, 11 of them. The earliest from 2016. The most recent from 7 months ago. If you are new to this channel, or if this story has been pulling you in, now is a good time to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because what happens next is the part I've been building toward. And I promise you, it is worth every minute. I moved to the 3rd layer at 4:40 in the morning. The tax discrepancy, I had suspected this one since year 3 of my marriage. Theodore's annual revenue, as he proudly announced at dinner tables, had crossed $180 million. His reported taxable income, however, as filed with the IRS through Whitfield and Associates, told a different story. Hugo's box contained copies of 3 years of tax summaries, not complete returns. Summaries that Gerald Whitfield had left on the printer in the estate office and that Hugo had retrieved before anyone noticed. 3 years, 2019, 2020, 2021. In each year, the reported income was between 30 and 40% lower than the revenue figures Theodore quoted publicly. The gap, when I calculated it across all available years and applied a conservative estimate to the years I did not have documentation for, came to approximately $14 million in underreported federal income tax. $14 million. I sat back in my chair. The kitchen was dark except for the glow of my laptop. Hugo's clock on the wall read 4:52 a.m. 14 million, the same number. The exact same number that I had found on page 312 of a subsidiary disclosure in a glass tower in San Francisco 6 years before I ever heard the name Mercer. Some numbers follow you. I organized everything into 3 categories. Category 1, land fraud, 3 families, 185 acres. Shell company, falsified liens. Category 2, certification fraud, 4 vineyards, 6 years of prohibited chemicals, 11 photographs, 14 invoices, FDA violation. Category 3, tax fraud, 5 years minimum, $14 million, IRS violation. I also pulled the Mercer Group's current debt structure. This was public information, available through SEC filings and county lien records. The Mercer Group carried $280 million in outstanding debt across 3 financial institutions. First National Bank of California, $120 million. Pacific Trust, $95 million. Heritage Bank, $65 million. The loans were collateralized against the property, the brand, and projected revenue. They were due for refinancing within 90 days, $280 million in debt, 90 days until maturity. And a patriarch who had no idea that the woman he had dismissed as decorative had just read every number he thought was buried. I closed my laptop at 5:28 a.m. I looked at the box. I looked at the notes I had written on a yellow legal pad that Hugo had given me. I looked at the screen of my phone, dark and silent. No calls from Grant, no messages, not one. He had slapped me in front of 600 people and had not called once in 8 hours to see if his son was safe. That silence told me more than any balance sheet. I looked at Liam, still sleeping. Blanket pulled to his chin, curly hair across his forehead. His breathing was even now, slow, deep. The breathing of a child who trusted that the person watching over him would still be there when he woke up. I would be, and I would be ready. Hugo stirred in his chair, his eyes opened. He looked at me, then at the laptop, then at the legal pad covered in numbers and names and arrows connecting one fraud to the next. "Find anything?" he said. I looked at him. I thought about the 3 families who had lost their land. About Mrs. Delgado's apricot orchard, planted by her grandmother in 1941. About the Huang's persimmon trees. About the Petersons' walnut grove that had survived 4 generations and could not survive 1 Theodore. "This isn't a vineyard, Hugo," I said. "This is a crime scene with a wine list." Hugo almost smiled. Almost. Then he looked at the porch. The light was still on. But through the window, behind the light, the first gray edge of Sunday morning was beginning to show. "So what now?" he said. I picked up my phone. I looked at it the way I used to look at a boardroom table before a negotiation. Not with fear, with focus. Now I call the one person who can turn paper into power. I had the numbers. I had the proof. Now I needed the one person who could turn paper into power. I picked up my phone and called the man the Mercers had never bothered to Google. I called my father at 6:15 on Sunday morning, not because I needed to wait until a reasonable hour. My father has been awake before the sun every day of his life since he was 9 years old, and his own father put a hoe in his hands and said, "The soil doesn't wait for you, mijo. You wait for it." Walter Drummond, 70 years old, 5'9", 162 pounds. Hands that look like they were carved from the same wood as his fence posts. Hair that went white at 50 and stayed that way, thick and cut short. The kind of hair that doesn't care what the wind does to it. He wears the same thing every day. Khaki work pants. A flannel shirt, usually green or blue, depending on which one is cleaner. Boots that he resolves every 2 years at a shop in Petaluma, that his father used before him. And a straw hat with a sweat stain along the band that he has never once tried to wash out because he says the stain is proof of honest work. His neighbors in Sonoma know him as Walt. Walt, the farmer. The quiet man on the 12-acre property at the end of Bodega Road who grows tomatoes, squash, and peppers in raised beds that he built himself. Who drives a 2003 Ford F-250 with 241,000 miles on it and a passenger seat that has never been reupholstered despite a tear in the vinyl that has been there since 2011. Who walks his property every morning at 5:30, checks his irrigation lines, talks to his dog, a 14-year-old border collie named Gus, and waves to the mail carrier at 9:15. His neighbors think he is a retired farmer who lives modestly on savings and Social Security. They are half right. He is a farmer. He does live modestly. He does check his irrigation every morning and talk to his dog and wave to the mail carrier. But Walter Drummond is not retired, and his savings are not modest. My father is the founder and chairman of Drummond Holdings, a privately held agricultural technology and land management conglomerate valued, as of its last internal audit, at $5.2 billion. The company owns 40,000 acres of farmland across California, Oregon, and Washington. It holds patents on 7 irrigation technologies. It operates 14 processing facilities. It employs 6,400 people, and it maintains direct relationships with the United States Department of Agriculture, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and 3 separate divisions of the Department of Justice. My father built this from 10 acres and a borrowed tractor. He does not have a Wikipedia page. He does not attend galas. He does not own a suit that costs more than $300. He has never once in his life given an interview to a newspaper, a magazine, or a television station. When Forbes attempted to include him on their list of wealthiest Californians in 2017, he called their office, asked to speak with the editor, and said, "I'm a farmer. Please leave me out of it." They did. The Mercers had never Googled him. Not once in 8 years. Theodore had met my father exactly twice. Once at the wedding, where Theodore shook his hand for 3 seconds and turned away to greet a state senator. Once at Liam's christening, where Theodore referred to him as Elise's father, the farmer, and did not look at him again for the rest of the afternoon. My father had said nothing on both occasions. He had driven his F250 to Napa, worn his cleanest flannel shirt, held his grandson, eaten the food that was offered, and driven home. He did not correct Theodore. He did not introduce himself fully. He did not mention the $5.2 billion or the 40,000 acres or the 7 patents. Because my father does not believe in announcements. He believes in answers. And no one had asked. I was sitting on Hugo's porch when I called him. The morning was cold. The fog was thick enough that I could not see the vineyard, only the shapes of the nearest vines, and the faint outline of the Mercer estate beyond them. Liam was still asleep inside. Hugo was making tea. The phone rang twice. Mija. That was how he always answered. Not hello, not good morning. Mija, my daughter. In a voice that sounded like gravel and patience and the particular kind of love that does not need to explain itself. Hi, Papa. You're up early. I haven't slept. A pause. My father does not fill silences. He lets them exist. He lets the other person decide when they are ready. Something happened, I said. Tell me. I told him. Everything. From the beginning. Not from last night, from 8 years ago, from the first dinner. From, is she just decorative? From the emerald dress I did not choose. From the script Theodore wrote for my 5-year-old son. From the slap at 9:14 in front of 600 people. From Theodore's voice on the microphone saying she's emotional. From the 12-minute walk through the vineyard in the dark with Liam's arms around my neck. And then I told him what I had found. The shell company, the 3 families, the chemical invoices, the fake certifications, the $14 million. My father listened to all of it without interrupting. Not once, not a question, not a sound. Just the faint rhythm of his breathing and, somewhere in the background, Gus's collar jingling as the dog moved through the kitchen. When I finished, there was silence. 6 seconds. I counted them the way I count everything. Then my father asked one question. Did he touch you? His voice did not change in volume. It did not change in speed. But something in it shifted. Something underneath the gravel. Something that I had heard only once before in my life, when I was 14 and a boy at school had grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise. And my father had driven to the school and sat in the principal's office and said nothing for 45 minutes until the boy's parents arrived and then said one sentence that I have never forgotten. If your son touches my daughter again, I will buy this school and turn it into a parking lot. He did not yell, did not threaten. He stated a fact, the way he states everything, with the quiet certainty of a man who has spent 60 years putting things in the ground and watching them grow. Yes, I said, like he hit me in front of everyone. 6 more seconds. Then he spoke. I'll make some calls. 4 words. No elaboration, no questions about what I wanted, no suggestions, no comfort. Because my father understands that comfort comes after action, and he was not yet done acting. Papa, I said, I don't just need protection, I need leverage. They have $280 million in debt across 3 banks. The loans mature in 90 days. If someone acquires that debt before the Mercers refinance, whoever holds it controls everything. The land, the brand, the inventory, every barrel in that cellar. My father was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't understand. My father understood leverage before he understood English. He came to this country from Jalisco at the age of 7 with his parents, who picked strawberries in Salinas for $4 an hour. He learned numbers before he learned grammar. He learned soil before he learned syntax. And he learned that the person who owns the debt owns the future long before any business school put it in a textbook. Which banks? He said. First National, 120, Pacific Trust, 95, Heritage, 65. I'll call Rachel. Rachel Torres, Chief Financial Officer of Drummond Holdings. 15 years with the company. The woman who had managed every major acquisition my father had made since 2009. She could move $280 million the way most people move furniture. With a plan, a phone call, and absolute precision. Papa, I said, one more thing. I need it done today, before Monday, before they know what's happening. Mija, my father said. And for the first time in the conversation, I heard something in his voice that was not gravel or patience or focus. It was warmth. The kind that only surfaces when a man who has spent his whole life building something realizes that the most important thing he built was not a company. It was his daughter. God gives you soil, mija. What you grow is up to you. You've already grown everything you need. Now let your father pull a few weeds. I closed my eyes. I held the phone against my ear and I listened to my father breathe. Somewhere inside me, the 14-year-old girl who had watched him walk into a principal's office and change the weather of an entire room with one sentence was still there. Still watching, still believing that her father could tilt the earth. He could. I love you, Papa. I know, mija. Now go take care of my grandson. I have some calls to make. He hung up. No goodbye. My father does not say goodbye. He says what needs to be said and then he acts. By the time I hung up, my father had already dialed 3 numbers. The first was his CFO. The second was his head of acquisitions. The third was a man at the Department of Justice. My father made his first call at 6:22 a.m. I know this because Rachel Torres later told me that her phone rang while she was pouring her first cup of coffee in her kitchen in Mill Valley. And she looked at the clock on the microwave and said to herself, Walter calling before 6:30 on a Sunday means someone made a mistake. She was right. Someone had made several. Rachel Torres, 53 years old, Chief Financial Officer of Drummond Holdings for 15 years. Before that, Senior Vice President at Wells Fargo's Commercial Lending Division. Before that, an undergraduate degree in mathematics from Stanford and an MBA from Wharton. She had managed every major acquisition my father had made since 2009. 47 transactions. Not one failed. Not one contested. Not one that left a mark on the balance sheet that wasn't planned. Rachel did not ask why. My father said, I need to acquire $280 million in commercial real estate debt before the end of today. 3 banks. I'll send you the details. Rachel said, I'll clear my schedule. That was the entire conversation. 31 seconds. My father's second call was to Daniel Yoon, head of acquisitions, 41 years old, former corporate attorney at Skadden Arps in New York before he moved to California to work for my father 7 years ago. Daniel's job was to find things worth buying and to buy them before anyone else noticed they were worth buying. He was, by all accounts, exceptional at both. My father told Daniel 3 things. The target was the Mercer Group. The instrument was debt acquisition, and the timeline was today. Daniel said, "How much?" $280. Vehicle? New entity. Delaware registration. Nothing that traces back to us until we're ready. Name? My father paused. I imagine he looked out the window at his 12 acres. At the tomato beds. At the squash vines. At the Sonoma Hills rolling south toward the valley, where a man named Theodore Mercer was probably sleeping soundly in a 14-room house built on Stolsden dirt. Sonoma Valley Holdings, my father said. LLC. By 7:45 a.m., Sonoma Valley Holdings, LLC, was registered with the Delaware Division of Corporations. Single member. Drummond Holdings as sole managing entity. Registered agent, a law firm in Wilmington that handled all of my father's corporate formations. No public-facing name, no website, no press release, just a legal entity that existed for one purpose and would fulfill that purpose before the sun went down. By 8:30, Rachel had pulled the complete debt profile of the Mercer Group from commercial lending databases. She confirmed what I had found the night before. 3 banks, 3 loans, all collateralized against the Mercer estate property, brand equity, and projected revenue. First National Bank of California. $120 million. Originated 2016. Floating rate. 2 missed interest payments in the current fiscal year. Covenant violations on debt-to-income ratio. The loan officer had flagged it internally 3 months ago. Pacific Trust. $95 million. Originated 2018. Fixed rate, converting to variable in 60 days. 1 missed payment. Collateral valuation under review due to declining wholesale orders. Heritage Bank, $65 million. Originated 2020. Bridge loan intended for the construction of a new tasting facility that was never completed. Full maturity in 90 days. No extension filed. No refinancing application submitted. $280 million in total. And every single dollar of it was showing stress. Rachel saw what I had seen. What any competent financial analyst would see if they spent 10 minutes looking at the Mercer Group's debt structure. This was a house built on leverage, not equity, not cash flow, leverage. Theodore had borrowed against the future to pay for the present, and the present was beginning to crack. The banks knew it. They had known it for months. And banks that know they are holding weakening collateral do one of 2 things. They renegotiate, which requires the borrower to cooperate, or they sell, which requires a buyer with cash and no questions. My father had cash. Rachel had no questions. The calls began at 9:15 a.m. Rachel contacted the commercial lending director at First National first. She introduced herself the CFO of Sonoma Valley Holdings, a newly formed agricultural investment entity exploring debt acquisitions in the Northern California wine sector. She did not mention Drummond Holdings. She did not mention my father. She did not mention me. She said, "We're prepared to acquire the Mercer Group note at 91 cents on the dollar. Full cash, same-day wire, no contingencies." 91 cents on the dollar meant First National would receive $109.2 million for a $120 million loan that was already in technical default. A 9% haircut. But a 9% haircut on a performing loan is a loss. A 9% haircut on a loan with 2 missed payments and covenant violations is a gift. The lending director asked for 30 minutes. He called back in 18. "We accept." Pacific Trust took longer, 42 minutes. Their general counsel wanted assurance that the acquisition would not trigger any regulatory review. Rachel provided a clean entity certificate, a proof of funds letter, and a legal opinion from the Wilmington firm, all prepared in under an hour by Daniel Yoon's team. Pacific Trust accepted at 89 cents. $0.55 million for the $95 million note. Heritage Bank was the fastest. Their bridge loan was 60 days from maturity with no extension in sight. The bank's exposure committee had already flagged it as a potential write-down. When Rachel offered 93 cents on the dollar, 60.45 million for 65 million, the bank's CFO personally approved the transaction within 11 minutes. By 1:47 p.m., all 3 transactions had been executed. Wire transfers confirmed, loan assignment signed, documentation filed. Sonoma Valley Holdings, LLC, now owned every dollar of the Mercer Group's debt. $254.2 million in cash had moved from Drummond Holdings' reserve account through Sonoma Valley Holdings to 3 separate banks in under 7 hours on a Sunday afternoon. The Mercers owed my father everything, and they didn't know it yet. I was sitting on Hugo's porch when my father called. Liam was inside, eating toast with honey that Hugo had made for him. Hugo was sitting beside me on the step, sharpening a pair of pruning shears with a whetstone, the way he did every Sunday regardless of what else was happening in the world. The phone rang once. "It's done, mija." 3 words, no elaboration, no celebration. My father does not celebrate acquisitions, he files them. The way he files seeds. The way he files seasons. Quietly. In order, ready for what comes next. "All 3? I said. "All 3. Sonoma Valley Holdings is now the sole creditor of the Mercer Group. $280 million. They'll receive formal notice of the assignment when we're ready, not before." I held the phone. I looked at the vineyard. The fog had lifted. For the first time since I had arrived at Hugo's house the night before, I could see the Mercer estate clearly. The main house, the cellar, the rows of vines stretching toward the ridge. It all looked the same, but it was not the same. Because as of 1:47 p.m. on a Sunday in October, every vine, every barrel, every stone in that cellar belonged to a debt that belonged to a farmer from Sonoma, who drove a truck with a torn seat and talked to his dog every morning at 5:30. "Thank you, Papa." "Don't thank me, mija. Thank the soil. It always tells you where the roots are. You just have to listen." Hugo looked up from his shears. He didn't ask. He could see it on my face. "He did it," I said. Hugo nodded, once, the same nod he had given me from the vineyard the night before the gala. But this time, there was something behind it that I hadn't seen before. Relief. 23 years of slow rot finally met with something clean. My father didn't buy their debt. He bought their harvest. Every future bottle, every future dollar, every future breath. $280 million changed hands on a Sunday afternoon. The Mercers were pouring wine at brunch. They had no idea they were already pouring someone else's. The debt was acquired, the evidence was organized, the leverage was in place, but leverage without legal structure is just information. And information, in the wrong format, is a conversation. I did not need a conversation. I needed a filing. I called Bradley Nakamura at 7:12 on Sunday evening. Bradley and I had started at Morrison and Beck the same year. Same orientation. Same first-day lunch in the firm cafeteria where we both ordered the same thing, a turkey sandwich with no mayo, and spent the next 45 minutes arguing about whether the Supreme Court had correctly decided Kilo versus City of New London. He said yes. I said no. We were friends from that moment forward. Bradley left Morrison and Beck 3 years after I did. He opened his own firm in Oakland. Nakamura Legal Group, 7 attorneys, boutique, specializing in corporate litigation, asset recovery, and regulatory enforcement. He had represented whistleblowers against 2 Fortune 500 companies and won both cases. He had filed complaints with the FDA, the SEC, and the IRS on behalf of clients who had been told by larger firms that their cases were not commercially viable. Bradley did not care about commercially viable. He cared about correct. He answered on the third ring. "Elise Drummond, it's been 4 years. 3.5. What's wrong?" Bradley always opened with the assumption that something was wrong. Because in his experience, people who call lawyers on Sunday evenings are not calling to catch up. "I need you to prepare 4 documents by tomorrow morning," I said. "And I need you to not ask me if I'm sure. Tell me." I told him. Everything. The land fraud, the organic certification fraud, the tax fraud, the debt acquisition, the slap, the 600 witnesses. I spoke for 22 minutes without stopping. Bradley listened the way Bradley always listened, completely, without interruption. Taking notes that I could hear through the phone, the faint scratch of pen on legal pad. When I finished, he exhaled once, long, controlled. The exhale of a man who has spent his career walking into rooms where the other side has more money and more power, and finding the exact pressure point where those advantages become liabilities. 4 documents, he said. 4. Go. I listed them. Document 1. Foreclosure notice. Issued by Sonoma Valley Holdings, LLC. As the current holder of $280 million in Mercer Group debt, demanding full repayment within 10 business days. Failure to comply would initiate foreclosure proceedings on all collateralized assets, including the Mercer estate property, brand, inventory, and equipment. Standard commercial foreclosure format, California Civil Code Section 2924. Clean, formal, devastating. Document 2. Formal complaint to the United States Food and Drug Administration, alleging fraudulent organic certification on 4 of 5 Mercer vineyards, supported by 14 invoices from Clearfield Chemical Supply, documenting purchase of chlorpyrifos, methyl bromide, and glyphosate over a 6-year period, accompanied by 11 time-stamped photographs showing application of prohibited substances on certified organic acreage, requesting immediate investigation and decertification. Document 3. Report to the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division, documenting systematic underreporting of federal income tax by the Mercer Group over a minimum 5-year period. Estimated discrepancy of $14 million. Supported by 3 years of internal tax summaries obtained from estate records, cross-referenced with publicly reported revenue figures, requesting audit and criminal investigation. Document 4. Emergency injunction petition, filed with the Napa County Superior Court, requesting immediate freeze on all Mercer Group financial accounts, pending investigation into land fraud, tax fraud, and certification fraud. Citing risk of asset dissipation and evidence destruction. Bradley was quiet for 11 seconds after I finished. I heard him turn a page. The foreclosure notice alone will end them, he said. They can't repay $280 in 10 days. Nobody can repay $280 in 10 days without a credit line, and once the IRS report and the FDA complaint are public, no bank in the country will extend them $1. I know. The injunction will freeze everything before they can move assets offshore or liquidate. I know. Elise, this will take their vineyard, their home, their name, everything. I know, Bradley. Silence. 5 seconds. Are you sure? I had asked him not to ask me that. But Bradley was not asking as a lawyer. He was asking as a friend. As someone who had known me when I was the woman on the 42nd floor who stayed late and double-checked every footnote and never once made a decision based on anger. He hit me in front of my son, I said, in front of 600 people, and his father picked up a microphone and told them I was emotional. Bradley did not ask again. I'll have everything ready by 7 a.m., he said, drafted, reviewed, and formatted. I'll send them to your email and bring hard copies to whatever address you give me. Hugo Franklin's house. I'll send you the location. Hugo Franklin, the vineyard manager? The man who kept every receipt Theodore thought he'd buried. Bradley paused. I could almost hear him smile. You always did find the second haystack, he said. We hung up. It was 7:51 p.m. I sat at Hugo's kitchen table. The box of evidence was closed now, its contents photographed, scanned, and organized into folders on my laptop. Hugo was washing dishes at the sink. Liam was in the bedroom, already in pajamas that Hugo had borrowed from a neighbor's grandson. They were slightly too big. The sleeves covered his hands. He didn't mind. I walked into the bedroom. Liam was sitting on the edge of the bed, swinging his legs. He looked up at me. Mommy, are we going back to the big house? No, baby, not tonight. Good. He said it quickly, without hesitation. The way children say things that adults spend years building the courage to say. Good? I don't like it there, Mommy. It's too quiet. Not good quiet. Scary quiet. I sat beside him. I put my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me. 41 pounds of truth. It won't be scary anymore, I said. I promise. Because of the great man? Because of a lot of people, baby. The great man, your grandfather, and your mom. You? Me. He looked at me. His eyes, my eyes, searched my face with the intensity of a 5-year-old who is trying to decide whether the world has changed or whether his mother has. You look different, Mommy. Different how? Like when you used to read me the hard books. The ones with the big words. You look like that again. I pulled him closer. I kissed the top of his head. His hair smelled like Hugo's soap, like wood smoke and something clean. Go to sleep, baby. Tomorrow is a big day. For who? For all of us. Liam lay down. I pulled the borrowed blanket to his chin. He was asleep within 3 minutes. I stayed for 5 more, watching him breathe, counting the breaths the way I counted everything. Steady, even, safe. I walked back to the kitchen. Hugo had finished the dishes and was sitting at the table, hands folded, looking at something leaning against the wall near the bedroom door that I had not noticed before. A garment bag. I almost forgot, Hugo said. You left this here 2 years ago, said it was just in case. I had forgotten. 2 years ago, during one of my quiet walks to Hugo's house, I had brought a garment bag and asked him to keep it. I had not explained why. Hugo had not asked. He had hung it in his closet and never mentioned it again. I unzipped the bag. Inside was a suit. Black, wool crepe, single button. I had bought it 6 months before I brought it to Hugo's house during a trip to San Francisco when Grant thought I was visiting a friend. I had walked into a shop on Maiden Lane and bought it with cash from the account I had been building for 3 years. The account Grant did not know about. The account Theodore did not know about. The account that existed because the woman in the drawer had never fully closed it. I held the suit up. It was simple, clean, no embellishment. The kind of suit that says nothing about fashion and everything about intent. I laid it on the bed beside Liam. Next to it, I placed my mother's Cartier watch. Gold, small, still ticking. The way it had been ticking since the day my mother put it on and never took it off. Tomorrow, I would wear this suit. Tomorrow, I would clasp this watch. Tomorrow, I would carry a briefcase into a room full of men who had spent 8 years believing I was decorative. I prayed that night. Not for strength, I had plenty. Not for courage. The woman on the 42nd floor had left me enough of that to last a lifetime. I prayed for my son, that he would never have to watch his mother kneel again, that he would grow up knowing that patience is not silence and silence is not surrender, that when he was old enough to understand what happened on this weekend, he would know that his mother did not act out of rage. She acted out of clarity. I prayed that God would steady my hands, not because they were shaking, because tomorrow they would be holding the future of 600 acres and 3 stolen farms, and 1 5-year-old boy who deserved to grow up in clean soil. Hugo turned off the kitchen light. The house went dark except for the porch light, which stayed on the way it always stayed on, because Dorothy had believed that a lit porch means someone is welcome. And tonight, for the first time in 8 years, I felt welcome somewhere. I laid the suit on the bed. Black, simple. No jewelry except my mother's Cartier watch. Tomorrow I would walk into their boardroom, and I would not be the woman they remembered. I woke at 5:48 a.m. on Monday, October the 14th. I did not need an alarm. My body knew what day it was, the way the earth knows when the season is changing. Not through logic, through weight. Through the slow, certain shift of something that has been building underground for a very long time. Liam was still asleep, curly hair across the pillow, borrowed pajamas bunched at his wrists. His breathing was the only sound in Hugo's house, steady, trusting. The breathing of a child who does not yet know that the world is about to rearrange itself around him. I showered in Hugo's bathroom. The water pressure was low and the tiles were cracked along the grout line, and the towel was thin and stiff from years of line drying. It was the best shower I had taken in 8 years. I dressed. The suit fit the way I remembered. Black wool crepe, single button. The fabric sat close to my body without pulling, without excess, without apology. I had bought this suit for a moment I could not yet name, and now the moment had arrived and the suit knew it the way I knew it. Some things are built for a specific hour. This suit was built for this Monday. I pulled my hair back, tight, a low bun at the nape of my neck. No loose strands, no softness. I was not dressing for softness today. I put on my mother's Cartier watch, I clasped it with steady hands and turned my wrist once to feel the weight of it. Small, gold, ticking. The only inheritance that mattered. The only piece of my mother that had survived the vineyard. I pressed it against my skin and I heard her voice, the way I always heard it when I touched the watch. Never give up the thing that makes you, you. I hadn't, Mama. I had just been waiting for the right Monday. Hugo was already in the kitchen. He had made coffee, black, 2 cups. He set one on the table without speaking. He looked at me and his eyebrows lifted slightly. Not surprise, confirmation. He was seeing what Liam had seen the night before. The woman who used to read the hard books. The woman who had been folded and stored in a drawer for 8 years and was now standing in his kitchen, pressed and complete. Bradley's here, Hugo said. Bradley Nakamura was parked in the driveway, a gray Honda Accord. He was leaning against the driver's side door, holding a leather briefcase and wearing a navy suit that was slightly wrinkled from the 2-hour drive from Oakland. He looked at me as I walked out onto the porch. He looked at the suit. He looked at the watch. He looked at my face. There she is, he said. Quietly. The way Arthur Morrison might have said it. The way anyone says it when they watch someone return to the version of themselves that was always there. He handed me the briefcase. Everything's inside, he said. 4 documents, hard copies, tabbed and indexed. I also included a summary brief, 2 pages, in case you want to walk them through it verbally before you hand over the paper. I won't need the summary, I said. I'll walk them through it myself. Bradley nodded. He did not offer to come with me. He did not ask if I wanted backup. He knew me. He knew that this was not a negotiation. This was a notification. And notifications are delivered alone. Call me when it's done, he said. I will. He got back in his car. He drove away. I stood on Hugo's porch with a briefcase that weighed less than my son and contained enough paper to dismantle a 340-acre empire. Hugo came outside. He was holding his truck keys. A 2005 Ford Ranger, green, manual transmission. 209,000 miles. The passenger seat had a blanket folded on it that Hugo had never removed because Dorothy used to sit there and she always got cold on morning drives. I'll drive you, he said. You don't have to. I know. We drove in silence. 3 minutes. Down the dirt road, past the eastern ridge, past the irrigation shed, through the Mercer estate gate. The morning fog was still low on the vines. The air smelled like damp earth and fermenting fruit, and the last days of a harvest that was already over. Hugo stopped the truck at the edge of the main house driveway. He did not pull in. He did not park. He stopped and looked straight ahead through the windshield at the house that had employed him for 23 years and silenced him for just as long. I'll be here, he said. I got out. I closed the door gently. I held the briefcase in my right hand. I walked toward the main house. The vineyard was on both sides of me. Rows of Cabernet, rows of Merlot, rows of the rootstock that Theodore had praised every day of his life without once understanding that the deepest roots in this valley did not belong to him. I walked through the vineyard one last time on my way in. The roots were still there. But they were no longer his. I entered through the side door. The kitchen. Maria was standing at the counter, preparing Theodore's morning coffee. She looked at me. Her eyes moved from my face to my suit to the briefcase in my hand. Her expression shifted through 3 stages in 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, and something that looked, if I'm not mistaken, like gratitude. She did not speak. She stepped aside. I walked through, down the hallway, past the dining room where I had sat for 8 years and counted. Past Theodore's study where Gerald Whitfield visited every January. Past the photographs of 4 generations of Mercer men on walls that had never once displayed a photograph of me. Up the stairs, 2nd floor, the boardroom. The Mercer Estate boardroom was not a boardroom in the corporate sense. It was a converted library with a mahogany table that seated 12 and a window that overlooked the grand cellar and the eastern vineyard beyond it. Theodore used it for investor meetings, bank reviews, and the quarterly board sessions where he sat at the head of the table and told 7 people what to do, and they did it, and they did. I opened the door at 8:17 a.m. 7 men looked up. Theodore sat at the head of the table. White hair, linen suit, light gray, Kane leaning against his chair. To his right, Grant, still in the shirt he had worn to the gala. Unshaven, red-eyed, he had not slept. To Theodore's left, Randall Fisher, the Mercer Group's general counsel. Silver hair, rimless glasses, a legal pad already open. Along the sides, 4 board members whose names I had memorized from estate documents, but whose faces I had only seen at harvest dinners where they shook my hand and called me Grant's lovely wife. Not one of them recognized the woman standing in the doorway. That was the point. Grant spoke first. "Elise, what are you doing here?" I closed the door behind me. I walked to the opposite end of the table from Theodore. I set the briefcase on the surface. I did not sit down. "Sit down, Grant. This won't take long." Grant looked at his father. Theodore looked at me. His eyes moved to the briefcase. He did not speak, but his hand tightened around the handle of his cane. I opened the briefcase. Inside were 4 tabbed folders: red, blue, green, yellow, each one labeled, each one indexed, each one containing enough paper to end a different part of the Mercer Empire. I opened the red folder first. This is a formal complaint to the United States Food and Drug Administration. It documents fraudulent organic certification on 4 of your 5 vineyards. 14 invoices from Clearfield Chemical Supply. Chlorpyrifos, methyl bromide, glyphosate. 6 years of application on land certified as organic. 11 time-stamped photographs. Your certifications are fraudulent. Your labels are fraudulent. Every bottle of Mercer wine sold as organic in the last 6 years is a federal violation. I set the folder on the table. Randall Fisher reached for it. His hand was not steady. I opened the blue folder. This is a report to the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. It documents systematic underreporting of federal income tax by the Mercer Group over a minimum 5-year period. Estimated discrepancy, $14 million. 3 years of internal tax summaries prepared by Gerald Whitfield, cross-referenced with publicly reported revenue figures. Mr. Whitfield, I assume, will be hearing from the IRS separately. Theodore's jaw moved, not to speak, to clench. I set the blue folder beside the red one. I opened the green folder. This is a detailed record of land fraud conducted through a shell company called Napa Heritage Group, LLC, registered in Delaware by Whitfield and Associates. 3 families: the Petersons, 80 acres, the Huangs, 45 acres, the Delgados, 60 acres, 185 acres acquired through fabricated tax liens, predatory debt purchases, and foreclosure proceedings timed to coincide with the county assessor's vacation. All documentation included, all property transfers traced. One of the board members pushed his chair back from the table, slowly, as if distance would protect him from what was in the folder. I set the green folder down. I opened the yellow folder. I paused, not for dramatic effect, because what was in this folder was the weight that held the other 3 in place. Without this, the FDA complaint was a regulatory issue. The IRS report was an audit. The land fraud was a lawsuit. But with this, all 3 became irreversible. This, I said, is a foreclosure notice, issued by Sonoma Valley Holdings, LLC. Theodore spoke for the first time. "I've never heard of Sonoma Valley Holdings." "You will," I said. Sonoma Valley Holdings is the current holder of every dollar of your outstanding debt, $280 million. Acquired yesterday from First National Bank of California, Pacific Trust, and Heritage Bank. All 3 assignments are executed, funded, and filed. The room changed, not visibly, structurally. The way a building changes when the foundation cracks. Everything above stays in place for a moment, but the physics have already shifted. The collapse is certain. Only the timing is unknown. "That's impossible," Grant said. "Those are our banks. We've been with First National for 15 years. Your bank sold your debt, Grant, because your debt is failing. 2 missed payments at First National, 1 at Pacific Trust. A bridge loan at Heritage with no extension filed and 90 days to maturity. You are a risk. And banks do not hold risks when someone offers them cash." "Who is behind Sonoma Valley Holdings?" Theodore said. His voice was low, controlled. The voice of a man who is trying to sound calm while the floor beneath him disappears. I looked at him, directly. The way I had not looked at him in 8 years. The way I had not been permitted to look at him. The way a window does not look at the wall it is mounted in. But I was not a window anymore. Sonoma Valley Holdings is a subsidiary of Drummond Holdings, I said. My father's company. Silence. Your father, Theodore said. The farmer. The farmer, Walter Drummond. $5.2 billion in agricultural and technology assets. 40,000 acres. 7 patents. 6,400 employees. He sends his regards. Theodore reached for his phone. He dialed. I watched his face as the call connected, or rather, as it did not connect. He tried First National, voicemail, Pacific Trust, voicemail, Heritage, and automated message. The banks were not answering because the banks had already answered, yesterday, to Rachel Torres, for $254.2 million in cash. Theodore set the phone down. Grant stood up. Sit down, Grant, I said. You're not in charge of this room anymore. Grant did not sit. He took a step toward me. Randall Fisher put a hand on his arm. Grant stopped, not because of Randall, because of the look on my face, the same look I had given him at 9:14 on Saturday night, after his hand left my cheek and before I picked up our son. The look that said, I have already decided what happens next, and nothing you do in this room will change it. He sat down. You have 10 business days, I said. After that, Sonoma Valley Holdings will initiate foreclosure proceedings on every asset collateralized under the Mercer Group. The property, the brand, the inventory, the seller, every barrel, every vine, every acre. I closed the briefcase. The FDA complaint, the IRS report, and the land fraud documentation have already been submitted. As of 9 a.m. this morning, they are in the hands of the relevant federal agencies. An emergency injunction petition has been filed with the Napa County Superior Court requesting an immediate freeze on all Mercer Group accounts pending investigation. Theodore's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. His face changed. Not slowly, all at once. The way a man's face changes when the call he is receiving is from an area code he recognizes, but a caller he does not expect. It was the FBI. He looked at me. For the first time in 8 years, Theodore Mercer looked at me as if I were a person. Not a window, not a piece of furniture, not the girl who used to work. A person. A person who had just dismantled his life with 4 colored folders and a briefcase that weighed less than his grandson. I looked back at him. You were right about one thing, Theodore. The deepest roots win. You just never checked whose roots were deeper. I turned to Grant. You should have checked the soil, Grant. You should have checked all of it. The certifications, the tax filings, the land deeds. And while you were at it, you should have checked the woman you married. Because the woman you married used to find $14 million discrepancies before her second cup of coffee. And you gave her 8 years to find yours. I picked up the briefcase. I walked to the door. I stopped, not because I had forgotten something, because there was one more thing that needed to be said. Not for them, for me. And Theodore, one more thing. You should have Googled the farmer. I opened the door. I walked out, down the stairs, through the hallway, past the photographs, past the study, past the dining table where I had poured coffee and cut fruit and smiled for 8 years. Maria was standing in the kitchen. She was holding a dish towel. Her eyes were red. Mrs. Drummond, she said. Not Mrs. Mercer. Mrs. Drummond. I nodded. She nodded. 2 women, 1 kitchen. 8 years of silence understood in a single exchange of names. I walked out the side door, into the morning. The fog had lifted. The vineyard was visible from ridge to ridge. 340 acres of vines and stone and soil that had been built on lies and held together by silence and sustained by the assumption that no one would ever look closely enough to see what was buried. Hugo was in the truck, engine running, window down. He saw me coming. He did not ask how it went. He could see it in the way I walked. Not fast, not slow, steady. The way a woman walks when she has put down the last thing she was carrying and her hands are finally free. I got in the truck. I set the briefcase on Dorothy's blanket. I looked at the vineyard through the windshield. The vines were still there. The cellar was still there. The house was still there. But the name on all of it was about to change. Take me home, Hugo, I said. He put the truck in gear. We drove down the dirt road, past the eastern ridge, through the gate. Behind us, Theodore's phone was still ringing. Ahead of us, the porch light at Hugo's house was still on. Even though the sun was up, even though the fog had cleared, even though it was morning and the light was no longer necessary. Some lights stay on because someone forgot to turn them off. Hugo stayed on because Dorothy never forgot, and neither did I. The consequences arrived in the order I had designed them, not because I'm cruel, because I am precise. And precision, when applied to the dismantling of a corrupt empire, is not cruelty. It is housekeeping. Tuesday morning, 26 hours after I walked out of the Mercer estate boardroom. 2 FBI agents arrived at the estate at 7:45 a.m. in a black Chevrolet Suburban with government plates. They presented Theodore Mercer with a federal warrant for the seizure of financial records, digital devices, and all documentation related to Napa Heritage Group LLC, Whitfield, Enenwell and Associates, and the Mercer Group's organic certification filings. Theodore called Randall Fisher. Randall arrived 40 minutes later. By the time he walked through the door, the agents had already removed 4 boxes of files from Theodore's study and a laptop from the estate office. The same study where Gerald Whitfield had sat every January. The same laptop where Grant had left bank statements open while he stepped out for calls. Theodore was served with a preliminary notice of investigation by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division on the same day. Hand-delivered, signed receipt. The notice referenced a minimum discrepancy of $14 million in underreported federal income tax across 5 fiscal years. It recommended that Theodore retain separate legal counsel, as the scope of the investigation would likely expand to include Whitfield and Associates and any associated entities. Gerald Whitfield was contacted by the IRS the following day. I do not know what he said. I do not know if he cooperated. I know that by Thursday, his name had been removed from the Whitfield and Associates website and his office on 3rd Street in Napa was closed. The blinds were drawn. The parking lot was empty. The man who had adjusted Theodore's numbers every January for 15 years had disappeared the way numbers disappear when someone finally decides to check the math. Wednesday, the FDA opened a formal investigation into the Mercer Group's organic certifications. An inspection team was dispatched to the estate. They tested soil samples from all 5 vineyards. 4 of the 5 tested positive for residues of chlorpyrifos and glyphosate at levels inconsistent with organic farming practices. The 5th vineyard, the original 60 acres that Theodore had purchased in 1981, tested clean. It was the only honest piece of dirt on the entire property. The FDA issued a preliminary suspension of organic certification for the 4 affected vineyards. Every bottle of Mercer wine currently labeled as organic was subject to recall. Every retailer carrying Mercer organic wines received notification. Within 48 hours, 3 of the 4 largest grocery chains in California had pulled Mercer products from their shelves. 2 restaurant groups in San Francisco and 1 in New York terminated their supply agreements. The Mercer brand, which Theodore had spent 43 years constructing, began to collapse in under a week. Not with a bang, with a series of phone calls that were not returned, and emails that were not answered, and doors that were not opened. The way all empires end. Not in fire, in silence. Thursday, the Napa County Superior Court granted the emergency injunction. All Mercer Group financial accounts were frozen pending the outcome of federal investigations. Theodore could not access operating funds. Grant could not access personal accounts. Payroll for the estate's 37 employees was suspended. The workers who pruned the vines and cleaned the cellar and drove the trucks and maintained the irrigation lines that kept 340 acres alive were told, by Randall Fisher in a conference call that lasted 4 minutes, that their paychecks would be delayed until further notice. Hugo called me that afternoon. He was standing in the vineyard. I could hear the wind through the phone. 37 people, Elise. Some of them have been here longer than me. I know, Hugo, my father knows too. Within 24 hours, Drummond Holdings, through Sonoma Valley Holdings, issued an interim operating agreement. All 37 estate employees would continue to receive full pay and benefits through a temporary payroll arrangement funded by Drummond Holdings. The vineyard would continue to operate under Hugo's supervision. No one would lose their job. No one would miss a paycheck. The vines would be tended, the irrigation would run. The harvest, when it came, would not be wasted. Hugo called me again that evening. Dorothy would have liked this part, he said. The part where nobody gets left outside. I smiled, for the first time since Saturday. A real smile. The kind that comes from the chest, not the face. Friday. Grant Mercer was formally charged with domestic assault. The Napa County District Attorney's Office filed charges based on the testimony of 31 witnesses who had provided statements in the days following the gala. 31 out of 600. The other 569 had been guests. These 31 had been witnesses. There is a difference, and the law recognizes it. The charge was supported by video evidence. 3 separate recordings from guests' phones had captured the moment at 9:14. The angle varied, the audio quality varied, but the image was the same in all 3. A man's open hand connecting with a woman's left cheek while a 5-year-old boy stood 2 feet away holding a crumpled piece of paper. Grant's attorney requested bail. The judge set it at $250,000. Grant could not pay it. His accounts were frozen. Theodore could not pay it. His accounts were frozen. Randall Fisher made calls. No bondsman in Napa County would take the case. Grant spent one night in the Napa County Detention Center before a board member posted bail using personal funds. I filed for divorce on the same day. My attorney, Bradley Nakamura, submitted the petition to the Napa County Superior Court at 9:14 a.m. I did not choose that time by accident. The petition cited irreconcilable differences. It requested full legal and physical custody of Liam Mercer, to be renamed Liam Drummond, based on documented domestic violence, 600 witnesses, 3 video recordings, and the respondent's pending criminal charges. It requested no alimony, no property division, nothing from the Mercer estate. I did not want their money. I had never wanted their money. I wanted my name back, and my son's. Grant called me 17 times that week. I answered once, on Friday evening. He called from a number I did not recognize, which is the only reason I picked up. Elise. His voice was different, smaller. The way a voice becomes when the room it used to fill has been emptied. Grant, how could you do this? I stood on Hugo's porch. The light was on. Liam was inside, sitting at the kitchen table, drawing a picture with crayons that Hugo had bought at the general store in town. Red, green, yellow, blue. The same colors as the folders in my briefcase. You slapped me in front of 600 people, Grant. I just slapped back with paperwork. Silence. 8 seconds. I didn't know, he said, about your father, about any of it. I know you didn't. That's the point. You never looked, Grant, not at the numbers, not at the soil, not at me. You never once looked at me and saw anything other than what your father told you to see. Elise, please. Goodbye, Grant. I hung up. I set the phone on the porch railing. I looked at the vineyard. The sun was going down. The light was turning gold the way it does in Napa in October, when the air cools and the earth releases the last of the day's warmth and everything. For a few minutes, looks like it was painted by someone who understood that beauty is not the absence of pain, but the thing that grows beside it. The following week, the full scope of consequences became clear. Theodore Mercer was indicted on 18 federal charges. Tax evasion, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of federal documents, land theft through fraudulent liens, money laundering through Napa Heritage Group. His passport was surrendered. His travel was restricted to Napa County. His attorney requested house arrest. The judge granted it, but the house was no longer his in any meaningful sense. It belonged to the debt, and the debt belonged to my father. Grant was removed as CEO of the Mercer Group by unanimous board vote the following Monday. The 4 board members who had sat in that room and watched me open 4 folders had resigned within 72 hours. Randall Fisher withdrew as general counsel. The Mercer Group, as a corporate entity, existed only on paper. Its accounts were frozen. Its certifications were revoked. Its brand was worthless. Its debt was owned by a farmer in Sonoma who woke up every morning at 5:30 and talked to his dog. And the 3 families got their land back. Drummond Holdings, through its legal team, filed corrective property claims on behalf of the Petersons, the Huangs, and the Delgados. The claims cited fraudulent acquisition, falsified tax liens, and predatory foreclosure. The Napa County Recorder's Office, under federal oversight, reversed the property transfers. 80 acres returned to the Petersons, 45 to the Huangs, 60 to the Delgados. My father funded the restoration of all 3 farms. New irrigation, new equipment, legal fees covered, no repayment required, no strings attached. He did not attend any of the ceremonies. He did not give a speech. He sent a card to each family, handwritten, on plain paper. Each one said the same thing. The soil remembers, welcome home. Hugo was promoted, not by title, by trust. Drummond Holdings retained him as the managing director of vineyard operations for the Mercer estate property, now administered under Sonoma Valley Holdings. His salary was doubled. His responsibilities were expanded. His half-acre house with the peeling paint and the 4 times repaired gas stove was renovated, at my father's insistence, with new siding, a new roof, and a new stove that Hugo refused to use for 3 weeks because he said the old one still had one more repair in it. The porch light was replaced with a new fixture, but Hugo kept the old bulb, Dorothy's bulb. He screwed it into the new fixture himself and turned it on and stood back and looked at it and said, "There, same light, just a better house around it." The weeds were gone. Every single one. And the soil, for the first time in decades, could breathe. 6 months later, April, Sonoma County. The morning my son asked me the question I had been waiting to hear since the night I carried him out of a cellar full of 600 people who chose their wine over our safety. I woke at 5:32 a.m. Not because I had to, because my body had learned a new rhythm. Not the rhythm of the Mercer estate, where I woke at 6:15 to pour coffee for men who never thanked me. A different rhythm. The rhythm of a house where the only person I needed to serve was 4 feet tall and liked his eggs scrambled with cheese. We were living in Sonoma, not at my father's 12-acre property on Bodega Road, though Liam and I had stayed there for the first 2 months. We had our own place now. A small farmhouse on 3 acres, 10 minutes from my father, with a kitchen that faced east and caught the sunrise every morning and a porch that wrapped around the front like 2 arms reaching for whoever was coming up the road. I bought it with my own money. The account that Grant never knew about. The account that Theodore never knew about. The account that the woman in the drawer had been building, one quiet deposit at a time, for 3 years. It was not a fortune. It was enough. It was mine. Liam had his own room, blue walls, a bookshelf that my father built for him on a Saturday afternoon using wood from his own property. A window that looked out onto 3 walnut trees that the previous owner had planted 20 years ago, and that had grown tall enough to shade the entire south side of the house. Liam named them. The big one was Hugo. The medium one was Grandpa. The smallest one was Henry, after the stuffed rabbit who had survived the vineyard and the cellar and the 12-minute walk through the dark and now sat on Liam's pillow in a house that smelled like morning and not like fermentation. Liam was in kindergarten, Sonoma Valley Elementary. He had friends. He drew pictures. He came home with dirt on his knees and stories about bugs and a girl named Mia who could climb the oak tree on the playground faster than anyone in the class. He laughed more than I had ever heard him laugh. Not the careful, measured laughter of a child who is aware that someone in the next room might yell. The wide, reckless, full-body laughter of a child who is not afraid of the sound he is making. He no longer asked why Grandpa yelled. He no longer asked why Daddy didn't hold my hand. He asked new questions now. Mommy, can Grandpa teach me how to grow tomatoes? Mommy, why does Gus sleep so much? Mommy, can Hugo come for dinner on Sunday? Hugo came for dinner every Sunday. He drove his Ford Ranger the 45 minutes from Napa to Sonoma with a bag of produce from the vineyard and a bottle of something he had made himself. Not Mercer wine, but wine from the original 60 acres, the only clean dirt on the property, which he was now cultivating separately under the Sonoma Valley Holdings label. He called it Dorothy's Reserve. He had not asked anyone's permission to name it that. He did not need to. My father joined us on Sundays too. He walked over from Bodega Road with Gus limping beside him, the dog's hips failing after 14 years but his spirit entirely intact. My father sat at our kitchen table and ate whatever I cooked and played with Liam on the floor after dinner and told him stories about Jalisco, about his grandmother who made tortillas on a clay comal over a wood fire, about his father who picked strawberries in Salinas and saved enough money to buy 10 acres and a borrowed tractor and turned it into something that would one day be worth more than the dreams of every man who had ever underestimated him. Liam listened the way Liam always listened, with his whole body, leaning forward, eyes wide, absorbing every word the way soil absorbs rain. Not because it has to, because that is what it was made to do. I did not go back to law. Not yet, maybe not ever. I was not sure, and for the first time in my life, I was comfortable with not being sure. I had spent 36 years knowing exactly who I was. The student, the lawyer, the closer, the wife, the silent one, the mother, the woman in the drawer. I had worn each identity like a suit, and each one had fit, and each one had eventually been taken off or taken from me. Now I was just Elise, a woman on a porch in Sonoma with a cup of coffee and a son who was about to wake up and a father down the road and a friend in Napa who kept a porch light on every night because his dead wife had told him that a lit porch means someone is welcome. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. On that particular morning in April, I was standing in the vineyard behind our house, not a vineyard in the Mercer sense. 3 rows of young Zinfandel that my father had helped me plant in February. The vines were small, barely knee-high. Their leaves were the pale, hopeful green of something that had just decided to exist. They would not produce grapes for another 2 years, maybe 3. But they were there, in the ground, reaching. The sun was coming up over the Sonoma hills. The light was gold. The air smelled like damp earth and new leaves, and the particular sweetness that only exists in Northern California in April when the rain has stopped and the soil is warm, and the world is in the brief, perfect pause between seasons. Liam came outside. He was still in his pajamas. The ones that fit now, not the borrowed ones from Hugo's neighbor that had bunched at his wrists. He walked across the yard in bare feet. He stopped beside me at the edge of the vines. He looked at the rows. He looked at the hills. He looked at the sunrise. "Mommy!" "Yes, baby." "Is this ours now?" I looked at my son. 5 years old, almost 6. Curly hair that caught the morning light and turned it copper. Eyes that were mine, hands that were no longer shaking, a voice that no longer whispered. I knelt beside him. I put my hand on the soil. It was warm, damp, alive. The kind of soil that has nothing buried in it except seeds and the honest intention of someone who planted them. "It always was, baby. We just had to pull out the weeds." Liam smiled, not the careful smile, the real one. The one that used every muscle in his face and made his eyes disappear into half moons and reminded me, every single time, that this child was the only harvest that ever mattered. He took my hand. We stood there, mother and son, in a vineyard that would not produce wine for years, on land that had no famous name, under a sky that did not belong to anyone. My father was on his porch down the road. I could not see him from where I stood, but I knew he was there. 5:30, coffee. Gus at his feet, flannel shirt, straw hat with the sweat stain he refused to wash. The farmer from Sonoma. The man who built $5.2 billion from 10 acres and a borrowed tractor and who, when his daughter called him on a Sunday morning and told him that her husband had hit her, had said 4 words and changed the weather of an entire empire. God doesn't always remove the storm. Sometimes he gives you roots deep enough to stand through it. My mother's Cartier watch was on my wrist, ticking. The way it had been ticking since the day she bought it with 3 years of a teacher's salary and wore it every day until she couldn't lift her arm. I pressed it against my skin. I heard her voice. "Never give up the thing that makes you, you." I didn't, Mama. I just had to find it again. It was in a drawer, in a house that wasn't mine, in a vineyard built on lies. But it was there. It was always there. Waiting for the right Monday. Down the road, Hugo's porch light was on. Even though the sun was up. Even though the morning was bright and the fog had cleared and there was no practical reason for a light to be burning on a porch in Sonoma at 6 in the morning in April. But Hugo didn't leave it on for practical reasons. He left it on for the same reason Dorothy had left it on for 30 years. Because a lit porch means someone is welcome. And in this part of the world, on this road, in this life that I had built from the wreckage of the one that was taken from me, someone was always welcome. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Not for listening, for staying. There's a difference. The people who listen hear the words. The people who stay hear the meaning. And the meaning of this story is simple. Love is not something you schedule. It is not something you perform. It is not something you announce at a gala in front of 600 people with a microphone and a script written for a 5-year-old. Love is a porch light, left on every night, whether anyone is coming home or not. Love is a man in rubber boots who drives 45 minutes every Sunday with a bag of vegetables and a bottle of wine named after his dead wife. Love is a father who answers the phone and says, "Mija," and listens and does not interrupt, and then says 4 words that rearrange the earth. Love is a mother's watch, still ticking, on her daughter's wrist, in a vineyard that is just beginning to grow. Some roots go deeper than money, deeper than names, deeper than empires built on stolen land and fake labels. Some roots are just love. And love, if you give it enough time, will always break through the concrete. If this story touched something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you're standing in your own vineyard right now, wondering if the roots you've planted will ever take hold, let me tell you something my father told me on a Sunday morning when I had nothing left but a laptop and a box of stolen receipts and a son sleeping on a borrowed sofa. The soil remembers. Trust it and keep the porch light on.